Conservative commentator Ben Shapiro is being applauded for his courage in taking on Tucker Carlson and allegations of anti-Semitism. It's the focus of, as you see here, an editorial in the Jerusalem Post. Full disclosure, I used to write for the Jerusalem Post at one point years ago, but it was written by Rabbi Steven Berg, a former director with the Simon Wiesenthal Center. The rabbi says he was moved to write the opinion piece after hearing Ben Shapiro's remarks at last weekend's massive Turning Point USA AmericaFest convention. Here's a clip from that.
If you host a Hitler apologist, Nazi-loving, anti-American piece of refuse like Nick Fuentes, you know, the Nick Fuentes who said that the Vice President of the United States is a, quote, fat gay race traitor married to a the person who said that Charlie Kirk was a, quote, idiot. The person who said, and pardon my language here, it's his quote, that he, quote, took Turning Point USA and it, and that's why it's filled with groypers. If you have that person on your show and you proceed to glaze him, you ought to own it.
Benjamin Anthony is co-founder and CEO of the MirYam Institute and an IDF combat veteran. Well, let's bring him in. There you are, to talk about this more. You served, correct me if I'm wrong, with the IDF on the ground during the latest war, and you're joining us live from Israel today. First of all, thanks so much for coming on. Really appreciate it. What do you think of the remarks from Ben Shapiro? You know, the point that the rabbi made in that article, and you probably read it, is that there needs to be more folks coming out like Shapiro, Mark Levin as well, and really taking aim at Tucker for allowing this and bringing people like this on his show. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, so first of all, John, thank you very much for having me. I wish you and your viewers a wonderful Christmas, for those who are celebrating, and an equally wonderful New Year. And you're correct, I did have the privilege of serving here inside the Gaza Strip during the course of this most recent war, but I'm far from exceptional for that, as you know, because I'm a huge fan of your reporting. There were 400,000 Israeli men and women beyond myself who did all that I did and a great deal more. So thank you. I think that
thank you.
We need to understand, we need to recognize that the Republican Party is going to have a fight within itself for its identity. And it's very apparent that there are thought leaders who are front runners for the governing philosophy right now of that party. Now, it's particularly important that I address myself to this, because were I to be an American, which I'm not, I would be somebody who was aligned with the Republican Party without any question whatsoever. And so I feel a greater responsibility to call this out when I see it. So there are a number of problems that I saw at AmFest. Firstly, you'll have noticed that Steve Bannon and other speakers removed the phrase Judeo from the phrase Judeo-Christian values. They're now talking about Christendom and Christianizing America. And I, as a Jewish listener who's a huge fan of America, don't find a place for myself in a philosophy that eliminates and erases deliberately the word Judeo. That's number one. Secondly, I was very troubled that Megyn Kelly said that the right would reign supreme if not for the schism within the party. And then she went on to identify that the sole schism and most significant schism was actually the subject of Israel. The inference being, if we could just remove that or the schism surrounding it, then the left would never return to power. I think that that's stigmatizing the subject of Israel in a way that's completely unforgivable. And then thirdly, I'm very troubled about the fact that Steve Bannon is using terms to describe Ben Shapiro, such as he being, and I'm paraphrasing, but it's an accurate paraphrasing, he is a metastasizing cancer on the conservative movement. This is the lingo of disease spreading that, quite frankly, we heard during the Third Reich. I'm not surprised that someone like Bannon is recycling that. And I think that after dealing with those three, it's important to note that Carlson is the progenitor and the propagator of some of the worst canards imaginable. Namely, he is saying openly that Israel is killing Christians in the Middle East with weapons supplied by America, lobbied for by American Jews. That is a blood libel. It needs to be called out. And while I appreciate that Ben Shapiro is doing so, I think that many of the thought leaders, including Ben Shapiro himself, who I believe ultimately is a force for good and forthright, clear philosophy in the Conservative Party. I think they've been too slow to do so. I think he was too slow to remove Candace Owens from his platform, the Daily Wire, when she first started to spew absolute bile against the Jewish people.
Yeah.
And I think he's got another challenge on his hands, John, if I may. I think there's an emergent anti-Israel voice still on that platform by the name of Matt Walsh. Now, a lot of people say, well, you can't cancel people. I'm not advocating for cancelling. I'm just saying people can do and say what they want. They can't just do and say what they want everywhere and anywhere. And those people should be shown the door at Ben Shapiro's organization, in my opinion.
Well, and I appreciate that. And thank you so much for that. It's a dangerous trend that we're seeing with the Candace Owens, who everything that comes out of her mouth, I'm sorry, I'm going to take off my journalist cap, but is just rubbish. It's terrible. It's anti-Semitic. Same with Nick Fuentes. So while Tucker, he's not backing down on this, he recently told a Crown that anti-Semites have a right to a platform for their hate speech because they have, quote, a soul. No, they don't. Not when they're spewing lies, fabrications, and hate. I don't think they do. And I think they should be called out. My question is, and it's a question a lot of people have asked, what happened to Tucker? What's behind this? Because he wasn't always like that. We didn't hear kind of these anti-Semitic and this anti-Israel theme coming from him, coming from Megyn Kelly. I have my suspicions. And it kind of goes back to Qatar and some of the influence that Qatar is having in the Western world, in the United States, in Europe, with social media. But what do you think? Why do you think this has happened with guys like him and Megyn Kelly?
So there are a few points. First of all, John, I want to thank you for being so outspoken. I appreciate it as a member of the Jewish people, as a fervent Zionist, as a huge lover of America, as I've said. I don't hear enough people speaking as clearly as you just did, and I can tell you it warms the heart of all of us to hear you do so. I wish there were more like you. With regard to Tucker Carlson, I'm not in a position to psychologically evaluate anyone, far from it, but I would say that I believe a couple of things are at play. Number one, he's now in the wild west of media, namely he's a YouTuber. There are no regulations there, and he's finally got license to say what's on his heart. Now, we are seeing just how ugly that is. But I also believe that as someone who was dismissed from Fox News, he's gone into a crisis of faith. And oftentimes when you find people in a crisis of faith, that's an abrupt response to some unimaginable event in their life, that they cleave to faith in a fanatical sense that is largely unfounded, not sophisticated, and fails to really comprehend the tenets of the faith, the tenets that brought you to say, for example, what you just said. So I think that Tucker Carlson is reacting to a disrupted event in his life, namely being dismissed from Fox News. And I think that, quite frankly, he, as is often the case among weak-minded individuals, looks around for someone to blame other than himself. And what does he say? Rupert Murdoch carries the water for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. I'm now going to attack Benjamin Netanyahu, the Jewish state, and yes, the Jewish people. Look, we all see through what he's doing. It is anti-Semitism, it's Jew hatred, and it's the worst canards that we can possibly imagine. And I believe his next step, in addition to saying that we are killing Christians in the Middle East falsely and that we are the purveyors of usury, something he said just a couple of weeks ago, his next thing will be to say that the Jewish people are the spreaders of disease. Why do I believe that? Because he, like Bannon, is recycling the propagandist, anti-Jewish, Jew-hating messages and nonsense that we know from the Third Reich. This is not new to us because there's nothing new under the sun.
Benjamin Anthony, what a pleasure to have you on. Really appreciate you. God bless you. God bless the IDF. God bless Israel as well. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Great to see you. Come on again. And I hope I get to talk to you again. Thank you. God bless you and Happy New Year's.